All right, let's dive right into this explainer and look at a concept we interact with literally every single day. In fact, it's so deeply embedded in our routines that we barely even notice we're doing it anymore. I'm talking about the simple, continuous act of choosing. Today, we're unpacking the fascinating historical analysis presented in The Age of Choice, and I guarantee it's going to fundamentally challenge how we think about this totally everyday behavior.
Think about your routine for a sec. Whether you're swiping left or right on Tinder, endlessly scrolling through Netflix trying to find the perfect movie, or just picking sushi off a conveyor belt, we take for granted that making these choices defines exactly who we are. We've really come to believe almost universally that we are the sum of our choices. I mean, even opting out of choosing is seen as a choice, right?
The philosopher Simone Weil absolutely hit the nail on the head when she wrote, "One of the indispensable foods of the human soul is liberty." Liberty consists in the ability to choose. It's brilliant because it shows how modern society has managed to take this profound, abstract concept of human liberty and fuse it directly to the everyday act of selecting from a menu of options. Having choices and making them is largely what counts today as feeling truly free.
To really grasp this, we can look at a concept from the sociologist Pierre Bourdieu. He calls this kind of universal, unquestioned belief a doxa. It's basically an assumption where everyone, no matter where they fall on the political spectrum, totally agrees on the foundational premise. Today, we all agree that having choices is the ultimate good. We might fight bitterly over what those options should actually be, like school choice versus reproductive choice, but we almost never argue against the maximization of choice itself.
But here's the crucial point, and it's a real mind-bender. We tend to think that this constant selection from a menu of options is just natural. Evolutionary psychologists might even tell us we're biologically hardwired for it. But the historical reality presented in our source material shows that this is an illusion. The highly specific ways we choose today, and the immense weight we give it as the ultimate hallmark of freedom, those are actually distinct historical inventions.
Let's look at how drastically things have changed. For most of human history, in the pre-modern Western world, freedom meant something entirely different. It meant not being dominated by a lord or a master, or it meant finding inner spiritual peace with a set of divine duties. It certainly did not mean picking out a highly personalized lifestyle from this vast array of preference-driven options. Back then, continuity and stability were the goal. Maximizing your choices had almost zero appeal.
When alternative paths did pop up in the past, they were rarely just neutral options. They were usually framed as what was known as Hercules' choice. This was a super popular early modern allegory where decision-making was a rigid, heavy test. You didn't just pick what you liked best, you were faced with two unequal paths. You either chose moral virtue in the good of others, or you acted on selfish instincts and tumbled down the path of vice.
The idea of just freely choosing based on your personal preferences actually took a really long time to develop. In fact, it wasn't until right around the American Revolution in 1776 that cries like British Major John Cartwright's "Take your choice" emerged as a culturally and historically distinctive battle cry. That moment marked the beginning of a massive shift in how humanity viewed autonomy.
So how exactly did we get here? How did we shift from Hercules' heavy moral test of virtue versus vice all the way to the endless consumer buffets and personalized lifestyles of modern life? Well, it wasn't an overnight revolution. It didn't just suddenly spring to life in the 1970s, and it wasn't fully formed during the Enlightenment either.
The shift actually happened in a staccato progression. It starts in the early commercial era, driven by the rise of global consumer culture and the intellectual fracturing of Europe after the Reformation. Suddenly, people had more material goods and varied religious ideas to pick from. Then, jumping to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, we see a second wave of democratic revolutions centered around the secret election ballot. Finally, from the mid-20th century onwards, choice totally fuses with human rights and global capitalism to become the dominant moral value of our era.
And you can see this explosion of choice as freedom reflected in legal documents all over the planet. Choice rapidly became embedded in global human rights, starting with the UN in 1948 emphasizing the free choice of employment and education. Today, it has expanded remarkably. It protects everything from choosing a religion in Indonesia to selecting your residence in Finland, right down to the 2015 Constitution of Nepal, which explicitly protects a citizen's right to choose their own endemic agricultural seeds. I mean, that is just incredible.
Okay, so here's where the story takes a really fascinating turn. To have all this supposedly free choice, society actually had to create a massive, intricate web of rules. Our source calls this the paradox of bounded choice. We naturally tend to think of freedom as the removal of rules, but the reality
It's completely the opposite.
Paradoxically, freedom of choice has always required an incredible expansion of state reach and social regulation to make it safe and organized for mass participation. Think about it. To safely go out at night and choose what to buy, you need new infrastructure, like street lighting. To choose a spouse freely, you need complex marriage laws. The 19th century was actually a golden age of rules, creating strict protocols for how to act so that our personal choices didn't completely blow up the social order.
Choosing actually became a choreographed physical ritual. Especially in our free time, people began using highly specific paper technologies to express their inner preferences to the outside world. We're talking restaurant menus, election ballots, dance cards at social balls, mail-order catalogs, and surveys. The constant repetition of these mundane rituals is what actually trained us to view the world as a menu, making the act of choosing feel entirely natural today.
Now, as we trace this history, there is one demographic that brings the tensions of this revolution into the absolute sharpest focus: women. Historically, women were largely excluded from these choice-making rituals. Yet over the last few centuries, adult women with social power eventually became the paradigmatic modern choosers.
We can see this cultural shift perfectly captured in literature. In Henry James's late 19th century novel, The Portrait of a Lady, the fictional character Isabel Archer boldly states, "I want to know the things one shouldn't do so as to choose." She didn't necessarily want to do bad things, she simply wanted the sheer, unadulterated power to survey the options and choose her own path, rather than having it handed down to her.
Mainstream feminism eventually tethered the very idea of emancipation directly to this concept of choice. The argument was twofold. Empowerment happens precisely when, first, women get to choose for themselves what they most desire, and second, when they are universally recognized by society as capable, autonomous choice-makers on par with men.
As impartial observers, we can see this historical framing perfectly crystallized in the 1970s. When feminist organizations like NOW began advocating for reproductive rights, they deliberately utilized the universally accepted economic and moral rhetoric of choice, literally coining the phrase, the right to choose. The strategy was to tie a highly contested medical procedure to an economic and political concept that society had already agreed was a fundamental, unshakable good.
As we wrap up this explainer, we really have to look closely at the invisible forces shaping our menus today. Because remember, even though we feel completely free when we're picking from a list of options, we almost never get to make up the rules of the game or craft the banquet of possibilities ourselves.
The options presented to us are always constrained and curated by invisible choice architects. Back in the 19th century, this might have been a dancing master deciding the rules of a social ball, or a shopkeeper deciding what goods to stock on the shelf. Today, it's party leaders, election officials, and perhaps most pervasively, algorithm makers in Silicon Valley who determine exactly which options actually make it onto your screen for you to swipe or click on.
So, if we truly believe that we are simply the sum of our choices, as modern society insists we are, then we must critically analyze the menus we are given. We have to realize just how much of what we're offered is culturally shaped, heavily regulated by the state, or even biologically determined by our evolutionary history.
I want to leave you with this provocative thought to chew on. The very next time you're selecting a show to watch, a political candidate to vote for, or even a romantic partner to pursue, ask yourself who actually built the menu you're looking at. And when you finally make your selection, how free is your choice, really?